Hey there, this is Dr. Pam Perry, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Speakers Magazine. And today we're going to be talking with someone who's featured in our June issue, which is debuting tomorrow. Her name is Sandra Kiser, and give you just a little bit of a formal background about Sandra. She's been writing since she was a little girl, and she's a graduate of Wayne State with a bachelor's degree in English and holds a graduate certificate in professional writing from the University of Central Florida. She began her career in the public relations department at Wayne State University and later began working as a technical writer in the AEC, which is architectural engineering and construction industry, and later transitioned into the marketing department. She works as a senior proposal manager with a construction management firm, and she's written several articles for the Florida Engineering Society of Journal. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. That's her professional bio. Right now, she has really co-authored a book of poetry in 2003 with one of her sisters entitled Alf, Alfres, Alfrescendo. Okay, Alfrescendo, and she can probably help correct me on there. But it talks about reflections of love. Her poem Attitudes was published by the National Library of Poetry. And then in 2020, she published her first book on Alzheimer's, dedicated to her mom and her brother. Mysterious Wonderment: When Alzheimer's Disease Becomes Your Word of the Day. And it was number one in dementia, number seven in aging parents, and number six in Alzheimer's on the release day on Amazon. And then last December, Sandra published a children's book, which was entitled The Amazing Adventures of the Jolly Heart Squad, to help them better understand Alzheimer's and the disease. This was really accompanied by a coloring book as well for younger children to introduce them to the main characters. So you can see she's had like writing on really her main thing. How you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Good, good. Well, Sandra, thank you so much for joining Speakers Magazine show. Look forward to seeing your feature in the magazine as well. But let's start with the part about the Alzheimer's. And a lot of people have people probably in their family or at least know someone who has been affected. I personally, my mother had dementia, Alzheimer's as well. And it's a debilitating disease, and I wish it on no one. I mean, it's like they're not there, but Alzheimer's shows up different in different people. But tell me your experience and how you and your sister wrote the book. And was it your mother and your brother that had the disease, or was it just the book just dedicated to them?
No, actually, my mom and my brother did. My sister and I, we had written the book of poetry some years ago. And then when I moved from Orlando to Montgomery to help with my mom's care, as she started to decline. And after her passing and my brother's passing, I thought, man, I'd love to write a book to encourage others and to share information about the disease. Because many times the articles and the technical publications that you read, it's not clear. You don't really know what's going on. So
Mhm.
I think it resonates better with people when you've had that firsthand experience and they are telling the story so you can identify with some of the things that are being shared.
Mhm.
So I decided I wanted to write this book to help others, but I wanted to write it when I wanted to write it. But you know how God works, like you don't get to do that. So um, I thought, okay, well, I'll just kind of jot down some notes and then I'll get to it when I get to it. And he just kept placing people in my path to encourage me and say, you should really do this because it will help people. And I really
Mhm.
think you should do this. And I thought, well, I don't know, I'll see. But every week, someone would come along and say, wow, I think that will help people because you can write, do
Yeah.
it. And so one of the ladies here, I was still in Montgomery at the time. One of the ladies here was having a writing challenge, and it was at the start of COVID. And I thought, man, why don't I do it? There's nothing else to do. You can't go anywhere.
Right. You're in a lockdown. Right.
Right. So I did. I participated in it and I outlined the book. And like within like 3 months, I had like half of the book written. And I thought, wow, I guess I guess God really is in charge because this book is happening. And so I wrote the book, and then in the midst of writing it, I moved back to Orlando, and
Mhm.
I just finished the book, and I had a couple of my friends read some of the information. I said, "Tell me how this sounds. Does it make sense?" They were like, "God, this is really good. I think you should move forward." And so
Mm.
I said, "Well, let me read it," and I made some edits. I had one of my friends who is a writer as well read it because I wanted to get somebody else's opinion. Because you think your writing is good, but somebody else reads it and they say, "What does that really mean? What are you saying?" So I did, and I moved forward and had it published. And I cannot tell you the number of people that reached out to me to say
Wow.
they were blessed by the book. Some people I knew, other people I didn't know,
Mhm.
acquaintances, people that I knew of other people who were walking the journey, and they were like, "Do you have any books? Because I know someone who could really benefit from it." So that made me feel good, not so
And
much
this
that I completed the book, but that I was obedient because it was blessing others, which is what I really wanted to do. But I kind of wanted to do it when I wanted to do it. You know how
right.
we are.
And so that was the book that was really like the catalyst book. That was not the poetry book, which you did with your sister, but this was like the catalyst book that really walked people through the whole experience
Right.
of what it's like to deal with someone that's Alzheimer's, your mother and your brother.
Correct.
And also too, then the children's book, how did that come about?
So after I finished the first book, I thought it would really be nice to have a way to tell this story to children so they could
Mhm.
understand it because,
Right.
like you mentioned earlier, it is a difficult disease, and you need to be able to explain it in a way where they can comprehend it, not so
Yeah.
much dumb it down, but make it entertaining where they would even want to hear about it.
Right.
So in the first book, I start off talking a little bit about my life. And as a kid, you kind of have to go back to move forward. And I tell this story about when my brother and one of my brothers and I were little, and we were outside playing, and we were throwing rocks at this frog. And my mom was like, "Stop it. Don't kill that frog. If you kill the frog, somebody's going to stump their toe." And we were like, "Yeah, no, whatever." It was me who did it. So fast forward to the children's book, I thought, man, that would be really cool if I could integrate that frog into this book because he wouldn't be your normal frog, but a cool frog. So it turns out the
Mm.
little girl is kind of mirroring me.
Mhm.
Um, the story is told about her uncle potentially having early onset, which is what my brother had. And then
Mhm.
the elephant being the symbol for Alzheimer's, that's where the little elephant comes into play.
Right.
He's a little dwarf elephant, so he's her best friend. And then
Uh,
they're out playing one day and they run into this frog who's like the town know it all, but it's
mhm.
actually based upon that frog that I killed as a kid. And so the mouse comes in because he's the doctor. I started off calling him a neurologist, and my best friend there in Detroit, she was like, "Girl, these are kids. Call him brain doctor."
Right, right,
So
right.
I changed it. I said, "Okay, you're right. You have a point." So the old adage, "Elephant don't like mice." So that's
Mhm.
where the doctor comes into play, being the
Ah,
physician, and he lives in a village called Cheddarville. So they
cute.
travel because the frog is the town know-it-all. He tells them about a friend who can help them learn about Alzheimer's once they become acquainted. And the doctor is the one who teaches them about Alzheimer's. They have a series of meetings with him, and each time he gives them a little bit of information, and then they come back and he questions them to see if they're retaining it. And so that's how the story builds. And then once they get through their meetings with him, they're empowered and they now want to go out and share with the world all about Alzheimer's and what it means. And we need to pay more attention to it. So,
Yeah, I want people to actually go to your Facebook page and actually see the cover of the book and the characters of the book because what you just said was so talented. So for someone who's writing like technical writing,
mhm,
architectural engineering, construction writing, poetry, nonfiction book, personal story, almost a memoir in a way,
mhm,
and then a children's book, and then also a coloring book.
yeah.
That is a lot of writing. So the speaking that you're doing in terms of that, is it all around? Because a lot of times this is what happens with people who are really gifted writers. They
Mhm.
speak on writing. Do you speak on the topics you've written about, or do you speak on publishing and writing?
I speak on the topics. I haven't done a lot, but my focus would definitely be the topics to spread the message about Alzheimer's so that people are aware of it and to
Mhm.
remind them not to be afraid of it because it's not going away. There is no cure. So the more empowered they are, I think the better for all of us because we can share those stories with others. A lot of times we want to keep it quiet because we don't want anyone to know that, oh, she has Alzheimer's. It's okay. You know, you
Mhm.
can't do anything about it. You're not going to wipe your hand and it's gone. So it's okay to talk about it. And I would say 9 out of 10 people that you talk to, at least 7 of them, if they're not directly impacted, they know someone who's been
Yeah.
impacted by the disease. So just keep talking about it and learning more and spreading the word. So
Yeah, that is really good. So, one of the things with going around and spreading the word and just caregiving is a whole nother mode. There's a lot of caregiver groups and there's Alzheimer's groups. So, do you find that the best places probably to speak would be like caregiver groups or churches, or there's a lot since COVID 19, there's been a lot where people are talking about the self care movement and that sort of thing. So, people who are caregivers, they expend a lot of energy taking care of other people. So, do the self care movement, there's like self care retreats or whatever. So, what are some of the places where um, you see yourself speaking or where you have spoken?
I have not spoken anywhere, surprisingly. I've done radio interviews to talk about the subject, but I
Hmm.
have not been out and about speaking anywhere. But I could definitely see myself at churches,
Yes. Yes.
caregiver groups, nursing homes, just the
Oh,
workers there, because a lot
right.
of times they don't really understand that they're there to do their job, but they don't really understand that what these people are going through. No, they're not intentionally being mean to you or not doing what you say. Many of them may not even understand what you're asking them to
That's
do.
true.
So
That is so true. That would I never thought about. Assisted living places would be a really good place, or even talking to some of the workers from that kind of thing where you're actually speaking to them. And then also churches. Churches have women's ministries, they have all kind of family ministries, but I think some churches even have support groups for those that are dealing with dementia. Explain to people the differences, and I know you probably did some of the research between dementia and Alzheimer's, and people don't understand like what is the difference? Is one worse than the other? Is one a variation? Is it overall arching? What is the actual disease?
sure. So dementia is like the overall disease where there's a decline in your cognitive abilities where it can affect your memory. Alzheimer's is actually a form of dementia and it's like the most common form according to the Alzheimer's Association. Like 60 to 80% of the cases of dementia is from Alzheimer's. So dementia is an umbrella disease. Alzheimer's is just one form. There are several different types. You know, recently we heard about frontotemporal or
Mhm.
FTD, which is the type that the actor Bruce Willis was diagnosed with. Then
Yeah.
there's vascular, Lewy body. There are so many different ones.
Oh.
I'm more familiar with the Alzheimer's because of my mom having
Mhm.
it, my brother, but there are several different types. But dementia is an overall disease. And even with the Alzheimer's, it starts to cause a decline in your cognitive skills and memory loss to the point where it affects and disrupts your daily life.
Mhm. And one of the things I think people want to, it's something that probably you can't prevent. I mean, I mean, it affects celebrities to everyday people. It doesn't. Are you active? Are you not? Do you smoke? I mean, so it's like there's no really cure because they don't know what it comes from. So you don't know how you get it. You can't figure out how to cure it. So they're still figuring that out.
True.
One of the things that I really want people to understand too is that when someone is dealing with dementia, or Alzheimer's, and all those type of things, the caregiver who is taking care of them is probably the most stressed, and there's very rare people who understand what they're going through. And
Right.
so I remember my mother was going through this, and I really didn't understand what was going on. I just knew that she was forgetting things, and there was just things that were off, and she says, "Well, she probably has Alzheimer's." And so, I was like, I don't know. And
Mhm.
and one of the things that the doctor who she was going to at the time didn't seem to really help. And so I realized that another friend told me that I needed to take her to a geriatric doctor. I didn't even know there was such a thing, a geriatric doctor. So the geriatric doctor said, yes, she has the beginning stages of da 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 this and that. I said, okay, I understand that. So now I have a diagnosis. I understand what's going on. It makes me feel better. I can now maybe research it. The book that I got, Sandra, was called The 48-Hour Day.
Oh, that's not what you want to hear.
That book was like this thick, and I'm already in a stress zone. And
Right,
I'm like, I cannot read this book. It was like too much. I was it, and I needed something that was a little bit smaller, a little bit something, or I really just needed to talk to people. So I got information from the Alzheimer's Association. It did help a little bit, but you really want to talk to people who've been through it and not just people who
right,
work at an organization. So I think really speaking to churches would really be helpful. Women's groups, or even when there is a retreat, when people have retreats or whatever, there needs to be like, where you have these kind of talks or workshops, I guess you would say, of how to deal with it and how to get care for 24-hour care. I know a lot of my friends who also had parents that have the disease, they had to quit working.
right.
How do you how what do
You
you do?
live.
Yeah, what do you do? It's like I have to quit working, but then I still have to take care of it. I mean, so what are some of the challenges that you think that your book kind of like helps people understand and make them feel normal, I guess you would say?
I think some of the challenges are realizing that you're not in it by yourself, nor do you want to try to carry that load by yourself. It takes a village indeed.
Ooh,
And you sometimes, we want what we want when we want it, but the thing that I've learned is to be flexible, because sometimes people can help you maybe for an hour, maybe for 30 minutes, and if that's all they can give, don't be so stubborn that you don't want the help because you want it to take a half day. They give what they can give because
yes.
everybody's got things going on. So definitely being flexible and accepting the help when people offer it, not being
Mhm.
so strict on you
That's
want this or that. And then I think also taking that time to relax, like when they're asleep, it's almost like a baby. Like, you
you
want to
can
get
read.
some things done, but you need to take that time and just kind of relax for yourself, because when they get going, I know with my mom, she can move so fast, and I'm like, oh my God, where did this lady go? And then she's like, I'm right here. I'm like, you were not right there. And you start questioning yourself, like, wait a minute, she was not right there. I just looked for her. So that, and then making sure you write down information when you see when things happen, not necessarily, not specific things, but just write things down, because then when you take them to their doctor's appointment, you can share that information.
That is so
That
good. That
help.
is Sandra. That is probably really, really the key because I'm telling you, once you take them to the doctor, y they don't know. You've gotta report out to
Right.
them. That is really, really good because I wouldn't, I would, I have to write down, like with my mom, I had to write down like when was the last time she ate or what was some of the things that she was doing
Right.
or the medicine she wasn't taking or she was saying this one made her you gotta write it all down because when you get in front of the doctor, it's like, okay, so tell me what's going on. And you don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is really, really key. The other thing that I think also too, like when you're going to speak to different groups about the disease, is to really talk about how you took care of yourself during this time as well. Like
Mhm.
you said, you moved from one area to another. So talk about the transitions of the things that you personally had to do.
So I come from a big family, so there were a lot of siblings. So one of the things we actually had a caregiver who came in. One of my sisters is a nurse, so she, to your
Oh,
point about the gerontologist, she
hmm,
recommended a local gerontologist there in Montgomery. So that's who actually diagnosed my mom. So
the
that's,
geriatric person.
yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lady that worked with her some years ago. She lives in Atlanta now, but there's a lady who worked with her years ago, and she did home health. So she reached out to her So when the caregiver would come, she would come maybe around 10. Because actually, what I was going to do, let me back up. So I was going to quit my job because I'm like, I could see my mom declining. I'm like, you got to do what you got to do. And
Right.
so the company I work for, they were like, well, you can work part time remotely. So this was before remote work. And I was like, are you sure?
Oh,
So I kept my job and I worked remotely. And then when I came back, I was still with the same company. But
yeah.
I worked part time though, because I knew I'm like, I can't focus if
Right.
I'm there to help. So the caregiver would come from 10 to about 2:30. And
Hmm.
so I would take time like before she got there to kind of watch my mom. And then when she would leave. And so I could work, I was working remotely anyway, so I could work late and just to, get the hours in. So one of the things I would do too is make sure I took a lunch while the caregiver was there. So I
Yeah.
at least had an hour for myself. And then we started to notice that my brother, this was, I think he had just been diagnosed when I moved. So he was still able to do a lot of things,
Hmm.
but he was starting to decline. So
Mm.
that actually, it seemed so bad, but it actually turned out to be a blessing because I actually got to be a part of that journey with him, even though, it's not something that you wish on anyone. But the other thing I would do with him, like I would take time, like we might go to Starbucks. I think most of those were for me, not necessarily him, but
Hmm.
he enjoyed the refreshers that I got for him. But we would do stuff together, so that was actually therapeutic for me because I didn't know his was going to decline so rapidly. So that
How
gave
old
me
was he
time with
roughly?
him. He was
Sam?
59 when he passed.
Wow. And so it just like towards, because usually they say if it's going to, and it's different for everything, but the average age is like about 70, 75.
Mhm. Right.
And his was early onset, which is
Early
a
onset.
which is
Yeah.
really, oh my goodness. So while your mom and your brother, both of them, and so then you decided to write the book, and it was during COVID where you hit and it's like, okay, I'm going to
Right.
do the writing challenge and it was easy for you to write it, and so
Yeah.
because you've written the book. People have come to you and actually say, "Hey, this has really blessed me. These are the things that I need to watch out for, or do, or
Right.
understand," because you can't really understand it unless you go through it.
True.
So
Very true.
instead of sometimes going through it, you can read it from another person's perspective, and you're just like the perfect person because you've been writing for your whole life, basically.
Right.
It's like the biggest thing. I think the hardest thing probably for speakers who speak on issues like this, or advocacy, Alzheimer's advocate, is just really making sure that people understand that you went through it, one, and so you're empathetic to them, but then also to everybody is different, you
Right.
know so there's some people who have Alzheimer's who roam. Not everybody roams. Sometimes you hear on the news like, "Oh, my parents had Alzheimer's and they left the house and whatever." Not everybody roams. My mother didn't roam.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are mean.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, "Oh, the people have Alzheimer's. They're really, really mean." Not necessarily. So it's like people would need to have these questions because they'll hear certain things like, "Oh, that this person is that," and not necessarily. There's some people that you know really this was something that happened. He says, "Oh, well, you should get a dog therapy, or I forgot, pet therapy. Pet therapy is really, really good, or whatever." So we went out and we got a dog. My mother's like, "I hate dogs." Growing up, she loved dogs. And then I'm thinking, like, yeah, that would be good. And we got the dog, and it was like, here's a dog. And she's like, nope. And so we ended up having the dog. The dog was therapy for me.
Yeah. Now, did she really not like the dog, or was that the disease?
I think it was a disease because she
Oh, okay.
loved dogs. She loved dogs. I mean, it was like she would light up when she saw dogs. And so we got her this dog, and the dog is over here. I still have the dog. My mom has passed. She passed 2019. So we've got this
Yeah.
dog. It's like, okay. But the dog was therapy for me. And
That's
so
the
when
same year my brother passed, 2019.
yeah, right before the COVID, all of that, COVID hit like beginning of 2020. They died at the end of
Um,
2019.
yeah.
And I can't even imagine what it would have life would have been like, because right after she passed and my dad passed, so you're not really sure like what's gonna
Yeah.
happen. But someone who has a disease, like a dementia, a form of dementia, they can't even understand like why they would have to wear masks or why they have to wash their hands. It would just be totally, totally just so crazy. So
Doing
what
too much. They're like, you're doing too much, woman.
doing too much, it would have been, oh my goodness. It's God just knows. God just knows. So the
Yes.
main thing that I want people to know that they can go to your Facebook.com. They can also go to Amazon. They'll look under Amazon and look for your name. They can see all the books. So the name all the books too, including the poetry books.
Sure. So the poetry book, it's not on Amazon. It's not
Oh, okay.
on Amazon. But the other two books are, the first one is Mysterious Wonderment, When Alzheimer's Disease Becomes Your Word of the Day. And
Mhm.
then the latest is The Amazing Adventures of the Jolly Heart Squad, the book and the coloring book.
The book and the coloring book. So that's good. So probably one of the main things too, another area besides women's groups, churches, the advocacy groups, but probably
Mhm.
schools. And
Sure.
so a lot of the schools, elementary schools, they'll have speakers and that sort of thing. Probably up to what, up to middle school, or no, just elementary.
Middle school, probably middle school, because the book is geared toward maybe like 11, 12 year olds.
So
I
middle
actually
school.
have a friend who's an assistant principal here, and I let her read something and read part of the book before it was complete, and she's gave me guidance on that. What age group? She said 11 and 12 year olds. But then also a lot of people who read it have said, Sandra, this is going to help adults. I know you meant it for kids, but girl,
Okay, that is
you
good. Because a lot of
understand.
people don't know how to really articulate or express their feelings. So when
Yeah.
it's a heavy subject, making it
Mhm.
lighter is
Right,
a good starting point to talk. But really speaking in schools, middle schools, that will be a really good time. And then the coloring book, obviously, for elementary school kids
right,
is for them. But even like to do a cross promotion between having a middle school. Some schools are like that, have a middle school and elementary school in the same place where
right.
the middle school kids can actually mentor, or I guess you would say kind of teach or
Mhm.
read to the elementary school kids.
Right.
I've had situations where I've seen that happen before. And even in Detroit, there's schools where all the kids are in the school all the way up to high school. They're in different parts of the building, but I was like, "Oh
Yeah.
my God, they're in one area." But going to the school districts and really making sure that they buy the book, make obviously having them in the libraries, and
Right,
then actually having like an author day where they meet you. Because at that point, when you're reading the book, you're like a celebrity in front of the kids. It's like, "Oh my God, they wrote this book." And you never know how that would inspire them. One, inspire them maybe to become a doctor, inspire them to be an author, inspire them to be a speaker. You just never know. So
true.
yeah,
It's
that's
true. I
that's
hadn't even thought about the schools, but that is a very good point.
yeah, that's schools. That yeah, and they also have like a the schools have budgets and that sort of thing for speakers and that kind of thing. So this is different because it's a book where I'm sure they would know, again, grandparents that probably have the disease,
Right.
and they don't know, and their parents would appreciate you trying to explain to them what's going on, other than because they don't know how to even explain it themselves. The parents don't. So
Right.
to have someone that will actually have a book about that will be really, really helpful. It really would be helpful at all. Good, good. Yeah. So the other thing, well, before we wrap up, is there anything else that maybe you want to share with our listeners before we kind of close out here? I want them to go to the Facebook. Are you on any other social media as well?
I am on Instagram.
Instagram. So the IG Sandra Kiser.
I knew you were gonna ask me that. I don't even know my IG name. I think it's Sareki underscore. Let me grab
Well,
my.
we can always go to the
Yeah,
Facebook. It will go
yeah,
to the
because I
Facebook
don't
page.
know it by heart.
Yes, well, that is good. Well, thank you so much for joining
Shameful, shameful.
us. Well, definitely, if you don't know it, then that means you're not over there as much. So Facebook is where you are. So that's where they can actually connect with you
And that's
personally.
because it's just my name. So
Right. Sandra Kiser, and that's part of the main thing. But I just love the cover of the book, and I love the girl on the cover. So go over to Facebook. .com. Sandra Kiser, you see a little girl with the little Afro puffs. It's so cute over there. She's got on the purple and everything. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining Speakers Magazine. And the magazine will be coming out at the beginning of June.
All right. Thank you for having me.
All righty. Thank you. Thank you so much. So that is Sandra Kiser. Sandra Kiser. You can go to Facebook, look for her over there. That's where she is. And also, to just make sure if you know of anyone that is looking for a speaker for the particular uh, area of speaking to women's groups, speaking to assisted living places, schools, she would be an excellent speaker for that to really talk about the disease from a standpoint of not necessarily a medical standpoint, but just from a personal standpoint. So I think it's very, very noble that she does that. So with that, I am Pam Perry and I am out. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll talk with you soon. Bye bye.